Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, April 1st, 2024, the day after Easter. Easter Monday on a holiday in Europe, a regular working day here in the U.S. Ray McGovern joins us now. Ray, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us, and a belated happy Easter to you and your family, of course.
Same to you, Judge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My mother, who was very advanced in years, but I was with her yesterday. Well, I've said already how old she is. She's 98 and a half. Says to me, say hello to Ray McGovern for me.
Really?
So from Rita Caruso Napolitano, 98 and a half years old, happy Easter to Ray McGovern and family.
Oh, thank you very much.
There were over the weekend, Prime Minister Netanyahu had surgery for a hernia. It's not a big deal these days, but he was under general anesthesia, and he did have to sign away his powers for a limited period of time, just like Reagan did when he was shot, and they had to give him general anesthesia to remove the bullet. But while he was in the hospital, there were massive anti-Netanyahu demonstrations in Israel, right at his house. Is something like that likely ginned up by CIA and MI6 the way they were before October 7th, the anti-Netanyahu demonstrations over his attempts to control the judiciary in Israel?
You can't rule that out, Judge, but frankly, I doubt it. The polls show that 68% of Israelis support what the Netanyahu government is doing right now. So as much as they hate Netanyahu, as much as they blame him for not securing the release of the hostages, I mean, even if Netanyahu left, it would be the same policy because, my God, because 2/3 and more of Israeli citizens approve getting rid of Palestinians, no matter how fiercely, no matter if it's genocide or not. That's the sad part here. Again, Netanyahu, they blame for the unpreparedness on October the 7th. But, demonstrating in front of him, they have lots of reason, especially for the delay in the release of the Israeli hostages. Of course, that's all they care about.
Do they recognize that if he's replaced, now I'm asking you to describe the psychology of the masses, but you were in that business. Do they recognize that he's likely to be replaced by someone who will be just as aggressive, or if it's Benny Gantz, maybe even more aggressive with the IDF?
Yeah, that's why they feel free to demonstrate against Netanyahu. They support the policy. It's absurd. And the other absurdity is that Netanyahu himself was quite right when he was overheard on video saying in 2001, 80% of the Americans support us no matter what we do. It's absurd, end quote. Well, it was absurd. I think we're down to about 50% now, but that doesn't seem to make any difference to Joe Biden.
Does the presidential briefing these days, you once gave the presidential briefing, but does the intelligence community briefing to President Biden these days inform him of where the IDF is in Gaza and what it is likely to do next? Stated differently, when the IDF invades a hospital and slaughters a pediatrician, as happened to my former student's cousin, the pediatrician, while the pediatrician is tending to two babies, not Hamas killers, but babies under a year old each. Would Joe Biden know that?
Not necessarily. No, when you look at what Joe Biden has been told to say, I go back to July when he said in Ukraine, Putin has been beaten. He has lost this war already. And his CIA advisor said just 6 days before that, and I'm talking about Bill Burns, of course, He said the ineptitude, the defeat of the Russian army has been laid bare for all to see. Now, if that's the kind of information that the president's daily brief is giving to the president, and it must be because, well, actually, it's not actually Bill Burns, it's his superior, Avril Haines, that runs the PDB. And it was she, of course, that said a year and a half ago, looks really good for the upcoming Ukrainian offensive because Russia's running out of ammunition, and has no way, no indigenous capability, is the way she put it, to produce the lost weaponry. I mean, how far from reality can you get? So the people working in the trenches, I don't know if they're trying to be honest or not. It doesn't matter, Judge. It doesn't matter.
Well, would Biden have known that? I don't want to get too graphic here, but would the CIA have known that Bibi had a hernia and was going into the hospital to have it repaired before it was announced to the public? Does American CIA know that, or does Mossad share it? Do they tell it to the president? I'm trying to get a handle on the depth of information that makes its way to him. I get it that there's spin in there to reinforce his preconceived notions, like this nonsense from Avril Haines. But when it comes to actual facts, Netanyahu's going in the hospital in 2 days. There were 100,000 people out in front of his house last night. When it comes to those unpleasant facts, does he get them? Does he receive them in the briefing?
Well, not in the briefing. He would receive them on CNN, on MSNBC. It's really quite ridiculous because the PDB, of course, deals in the president's daily brief, deals in sensitive, classified information for the most part. They would assume, if I were the briefer, I would assume that Biden knew exactly what Bibi Netanyahu's status was, how he now has come out of the hernia operation, he's back in charge and all that stuff. So that's not really an intelligence function. It's really, and the other thing I would say is that the relationship between Mossad and the CIA station in West Jerusalem, if you will, is hand in glove. We are told by the Israelis, when they deign to tell us exactly what's going to happen, they would have told us as soon as Bibi said, yeah, I need to have an operation.
And that would have been reported to the president by some means.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the White House Situation Room would get that on the, I was going to say on the ticker. Now it's that's a little different. They get it and they give it to Jake Sullivan. And Jake Sullivan, of course, is the interface. He supervises, regulates, runs herd on every information that gets to the president.
Chris, keep running this loop, please. I want to ask Ray about it. So you see these large gatherings. You see police on horses. I mean, some of this is really odd because you see them with torches. This is during the daylight, but this is all yesterday and the day before. This is all yesterday in Israel demanding new elections, to the point where he responded and said, if we held elections tomorrow, it would help Hamas. Now, there you see the size of the crowd. Are you surprised to see any of that? Fires.
Not really. This is just a little more than has been the case over the last couple of weeks. Again, they don't like Netanyahu, but it's not that they're craving a change in policy. They want to exterminate the Palestinians. 68% of the Israeli citizens want that. So it really doesn't matter if the police have to be rough with some of the people who place priority on freeing Israeli hostages. It's going to continue unless and until Biden says enough. Okay, Biden says, look, what we're going to do now, so that people don't starve to death anymore, we're going to send in troops from CENTCOM. They're going to accompany those trailers into Gaza, and I will instruct my troops to shoot if they are in danger. That's what's got to happen. It won't happen because, as Netanyahu said long ago, the support in America, and particularly in Congress, in the administration, elsewhere, is 80% then, at least over 50% now, I would wager.
I don't remember the year that this happened. Alistair Crook was talking about it. Bill Clinton was very, very down on Netanyahu, felt that Netanyahu had berated him and was arrogant and didn't treat Clinton like he was the president of the United States. And Clinton, again, according to Alistair, utilized MI6 and CIA to foment new elections in Israel, which Netanyahu lost. This is the one of those time periods when he was out of office. Does CIA and does MI6 foment elections, and might they do it again?
The answer is yes. And I'd go back to 2005 when Condoleezza Rice, in her wisdom, said, hey, we're a democracy. Let's have free elections in Gaza and in the Palestinian Authority. Now, no one told Condoleezza Rice that if there were free elections, Hamas would win. Why? Not because they shoot up people, but because they care about the orphan, the widow, and the refugee. They have hospitals. They have all kinds of social services that feed the people of Gaza. So what happened? Hamas won hands down. What did the CIA do? What do we do, Condoleezza? Foment a coup. They did lay on a coup. We know the names of the people involved. It was in Vanity Fair, for God's sake. The coup failed. And Hamas continued to reign in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority took tail and still was in charge of the West Bank.
I mean, Vanity Fair, which is a cultural and fashion magazine, published the names of the coup plotters?
Yeah, Dahlin was one of the names. These were people that, the CIA has been involved with for decades, okay? It's all there, and nobody has referred to it, during this dust-up. I'm trying to remember the name of it's a very accomplished author, and it was chapter and verse of what happened. And I don't know how he got access to all this, but sometimes CIA people, operatives, like to brag about what they were able to do and even admit sometimes what they were unable to do.
All right, here's Netanyahu yesterday, Sunday, in Israel. This is after his surgery. Now, this is an AI translation. So the translation is in his voice. He's speaking in Hebrew, but you're going to hear him as if he's speaking in English. He uses a very, very, very American word to refer to the people in Hamas. I'm not so sure that AI got this right, but you'll hear it at the end.
We approved the operational plans for Rafah to the IDF. The IDF prepared to evacuate the civilian population and to provide humanitarian aid. This is also true operationally and also internationally. It takes time, but it will be done. We will enter Rafah and eliminate the hot dogs there for one simple reason. There is no victory without entering Rafah.
We will eliminate the hot dogs there. Again, I don't know if that's an AI translation or how he intended to use that word or what word in Hebrew he used, and that's what came out.
My Hebrew is not up to snuff, Judge, but I suspect that was an AI flaw. What he's saying here, of course, is we're going to do it anyway, but we can't do it right away. And that's a point I made previously. The IDF is not in such shape right now to go into Rafah now. They will be in a month or two, unless Joe Biden puts his foot down and says, look, there's no place for these people to be displaced. And Egypt is not going to take them, and we're not going to let you use that offshore pier to load them up on ships and hope that they get to safe ports in Europe or the United States. We're not going to tolerate that, okay? So knock it off, TB. Knock it off, Netanyahu. Knock it off now.
It's not going to happen. I mean, the Israelis and the donor class in America can criticize Biden all they want. He's still sending 2,000-pound bombs. He sent 2,000-pound bombs over there on Good Friday, for gosh sakes.
That's right. And more fighters as well. Good Friday, maybe an appropriate time to do this kind of violence to
What do you mean
human
more
beings.
fighters? More Marines?
More fighter bombers. Yeah.
By fighters you mean jets. You
Fighter
don't
bombers,
mean
yeah.
manpower.
No.
Well, who
Sorry.
operates those jets? American Air Force or
No,
Israeli?
the Israelis are almost as good as our Air Force and the pilots that they have trained. They train together. They're quite capable of doing that all by themselves, as my kids say.
So, as far as we know, Tony Blinken is still lying to the Congress that these shipments are American, U.S. national security and emergency. He's got to certify that under oath in order to bypass Congress.
Yeah, and the new rules-based international order, you certify what you want, and you don't certify what you don't want. It's completely illegal. There are lots of illegalities going on here, to include or dissing the UN Security Council resolution passed 14-0 with our abstention, saying it's not binding. Since when is a UN Security Council resolution not binding? I know of no previous instance of that. It is binding, and it's gonna run out another week because that's the end of Ramadan. Judge, this was a fiasco. Let me just take you through a little bit of these steps.
Go ahead.
The U.S. wanted to abstain, right? And they could abstain because it said just 2 weeks, okay? 2 weeks of a ceasefire until the end of Ramadan. And then that would be looking toward a permanent ceasefire. And the U.S. went to Israel and said, is that okay? No, it is not okay. You can't say permanent. So the U.S. looked in the dictionary and felt, oh, how about lasting? Lasting. That means it could end like at the end of Ramadan. You could do the same thing. No, lasting's no good either. Well, the U.S. got up its courage and said, no, it's going to be lasting. And they abstained. And what did Netanyahu say? That's terrible. Why did you abstain? And he said, we're not going to send our people to Washington anymore like we were going to. That's how bad it is. The U.S. groveling here, giving obsequiousness a bad name.
I don't know. I wish I could interrogate Biden's political people, even though this is not a show about American domestic politics. I don't know how he can be apologizing to the Muslim community in Michigan for hitting too hard, but then still sending 2,000-pound bombs over there. You can't have it. Can't have it both ways. The Genocide Joe nickname, whatever you think of Biden as a person, the Genocide Joe nickname is highly appropriate. Without Joe, there's no genocide.
That's right. And he could end it today. I don't know if anybody's told him that. Maybe he's not compass mentis enough to realize that he holds the key to this whole thing, and he could end it today, but he won't. And he has no advisors that I know of that will tell him, look, like the advisors in March 1968, Vietnam, look, Mr. President, you were lied to. We're not going to win. We're going to lose. You better go to negotiations. You better have a bombing pause. You better not run for re-election. That was March 1968 after the Tet Offensive. The analogy is very, very close, and somebody's got to tell Joe Biden, look, it really probably better if you spend more time with your family, especially since Hunter really needs you now, and have somebody else come up, because Joe Biden is going to lose this election if he continues to be the Democratic candidate, in my view, in my amateur domestic politics view.
I wonder if Joe Biden understands the difference between sheep and goats, Ray. Here's your tweet or your X. You're with the goats, Joe Biden, Matthew 25. Quote, for I was hungry and you did not feed me, thirsty and you did not give me drink, close quote. At your invocation, we prayed you would govern, knowing the difference between right and wrong. You blew it. AIPAC money won't buy you a spot with the sheep. Very well said, Monsignor McGovern. Very well said.
I've been called a lot of things.
but never that. But this is Joe. He can't win without Michigan. His advisors tell him that probably every time they talk to him, but he's still wetted at the hip with Bibi. So no matter what Netanyahu says about him, no matter what the pro-Israeli press says about him, still sending 2,000-pound bombs over there. 2,000-pound bombs. So they'll drop it on a refugee camp to kill one Hamas guy, and they kill 300 civilians as well.
Judge, I think I'd like to prescind from political calculations for just a moment and talk about the moral values involved here. I take my morality from the Judeo-Christian tradition. That was Matthew 25. At his inauguration, and that's why I quoted the invocation, it was done by the previous president of Georgetown, O'Donnell, a Jesuit. And he was very, very nice in his prayer. But what is he saying to Joe Biden now? I'm reminded of Dan Berrigan saying, sometimes important clergymen are trotted out to bless things like war and things like genocide, even if it's by not speaking the truth. Now, where is Father O'Donnell now? Why does he at least ask for a private audience with Biden and say, look, Joe, this is just wrong. Read Matthew 25. You're going to end up with the goats, Joe. That's what's going to happen to you.
Yeah. I think O'Donnell is now a bishop in New Jersey. If it's the same O'Donnell, I'm not sure if we're talking about the same person. Wow.
I'm not sure. I hadn't heard that, Judge. I think he's an intellectual, so to speak. I heard he was in some seminary somewhere out of sight, except for the inaugurations.
Could be two people with the same or substantially similar last name. Just over to Ukraine before we finish. Is there a consensus, as far as you can tell, amongst the intel community, people that are telling the truth, that Ukraine is finished?
You mean alumni intel people?
Yeah. People that do not have to tailor their views to please their politician bosses.
Yes, it's very clear. The only question is how quickly Putin will send his armed forces all the way to the Dnieper River. I'm one that emphasized Putin's measured attrition approach. And I think that his recent appeals and the appeals of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are very clear. Look, we'd prefer to negotiate this thing, but we're not going to negotiate on that crazy formula that Zelensky put forward as a precondition. They're willing to negotiate. So I think Putin will be still cautious, still measured. He'll keep going, but he's bombing the hell out of actually their power stations now. That really upped in volume after the terrorist attack on the 22nd. So, it's going to continue unless Joe Biden decides, well, there's got to be a different way. And my fear is that the only card he has is to deploy a small nuclear weapon to stop Putin in his tracks and preserve his chances to get reelected. That's the only option. And we warned the president about that. We, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, a year and a half ago, we said, Mr. President, Austin, your defense secretary, may think we can inflict the strategic defeat on Russia. You can't do that without World War III. Mr. President, you say you don't want World War III. Can you do that little syllogism? Can you do it? Can you figure out that you can't do that without using nuclear weapons? I'm not sure he has that figured out. And my fear is that these acolytes, these sophomores will say, well, that's the only chance we have. Let's demonstrate. Let's find some way to show that we're still in the game. And that would be only, not cluster munitions, not depleted uranium. That would be a small, or what they call low yield nuclear weapon. God help us.
Do you think that along with Larry Johnson and Alistair Crook, that the attack on the Moscow concert hall was a turning point
No, this is a gradual thing. And Putin is still measured, and he's bombing the hell out of Ukraine. But if you look at the thing, I have a slightly different view. If the attack was meant to embarrass Putin before the election, bear in mind the election was 15, 16, 17 March. The warning came on the 7th of March. What was within 48 hours? The warning specified 48 hours. The major concert by this shaman fellow, who I described as, what do they call anyhow, he's the big patriotic.
It would be like Taylor Swift over here.
Yeah, that's what I couldn't remember. So you look at it's on the web. His performance the next day on the 10th. Okay, he stirs up patriotic fervor in a kind of scary way. Okay, and he sings "I am Russian, Ya Ruski," and then he sings the Russian national anthem, and you can look at that crowd, man, they're really whipped up. Okay, so what was the purpose of this thing? It was to give the Russians a black eye, give Putin a black eye on the 9th of March, within 48 hours. Now, what happened? We know that security was there were 3 police officers for every participant in the, I exaggerate, of course, but they called it off. Okay, now what happened? The election happened, and everybody kind of relaxed and said, wow, we escaped that one. If the idea was to disrupt the election's over, and everybody relaxed, and sure as well, before you know it, on the 22nd, so almost a week after the election, we have this terrorist attack. That's how I reconstruct it here. And, who was responsible? I think the Ukrainians played a role. I think that will come out eventually. Whether people believe it or not is another matter. People never believe what the Russians say, especially like on that MH17 shoot down. Well, that was not even admitted into the examination of these things. So what I'm saying here is that there's a logical explanation why Ukraine or other people wanted to disrupt the election, embarrass Putin. They had a 48-hour window. The 9th was the big shaman concert. You could see what it was like by the video of the next day. And the security was enhanced to the degree that these guys said, we're not gonna have a chance to do our terrorist act here. Let's postpone it. Now, whoever was orchestrating this, it could have been the U.S. or Ukraine. Well, did they still have control of these guys? Were they able to tell them, okay, knock it off now, the election is gone? I don't know. That's a very unanswered question. But if they did not have control, well, that makes it less damaging in terms of the U.S. role here, or the Western role, the U.K. role, MI6. That makes it less damaging. That they know about it before. They did sort of warn, but after the election went by, the raison d'etre for this terrorist attack dissipated, and so it happened as a surprise to most everybody. Now, I don't know. That's how I reconstruct it. It's not very different from Larry, from others, but it does start out with that 48 hours. Yeah, I can explain 48 hours.
Got it.
The concert.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks very much for your comments and your analysis. We'll see you at the end of the week with Larry for the Intel Roundtable. Have a great week. All the best, my friend.
You too, Judge. Thanks.
Thank you. Coming up at 11 this morning, the aforestated Larry Johnson, and at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Anya Parampil. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.